very welcome to Confident Women Ireland's collaboration with the Irish Political Roundup's new segment format, Women's Views in Society and Politics. Playing along with the game of the long-term name of the segment and format, this is where we will be discussing women's issues, women who are under the radar and both, in plain sight, who are showing up, standing up, and speaking up for women's and children's rights. To begin with, we are going to dive right into what is prominent in the last few years with women's and children's rights and the transgender ideology, the hate speech bill, surrogacy, all the issues that have been here in Ireland and the referendum, especially the indoctrination of young children, the definition of a woman, the protection of women's spaces, places, and sports. Ladies, we are launching a woman, children, and Irish politics podcast with international links and viewpoints too. Anyone who can think of a better name, please feel free to post it in the comments section below. The podcast will be published both on Confident Women Ireland and the Irish Political Roundup YouTube channels. Our panelist joining us today is Tracy Donegan, and is a Dublin lady living in America, in Texas, and she is very, very prominent over there in Texas and standing up for women's rights here in Ireland. And we have mother and daughter duo, Sarah and Julie, and who are living in the Ireland's Guardian of Wicklow, who have been in the trenches and front line of this war against women and children here in Ireland. And joining us too is Roisin Mishu, a Dublin woman now living in Belgium. And so we have an Irish, American, and European perspective on all women's and children's rights. Ladies, you're very welcome.
Thanks, Roisin. Good to be here.
Thanks for the invitation.
Ladies, it's a new segment here that we will be posting on the Confident Women Ireland and the Irish Political Roundup, but we need to get the message out there of what is happening here in Ireland, and especially with the women's and children's rights, that women have been silenced, women have been sidelined, and women have been really just made invisible. From the referendums, the definition of a woman. And Ireland really did vote in the referendums, especially with the constitution and the transgender ideology. And I think, Julie, there's a famous video with you on Twitter where you're asking the Sinn Féin TD, what is a woman?
Yes, well, Owen O'Brien, to give him his due, he did stop and talk to us, etc., when we were protesting outside the Dáil. But I think it's not really an issue. Women's, the idea of what we're fighting here is not an issue with any of the political parties. They're not something, I mean, their suggestions for prison are nothing about the idea of women in men's prisons, or there's nothing about the surrogacy thing or anything else. They're not raising any of the issues that we have been trying to raise for the last while. So.
And where was this encounter with the Sinn Féiner? Was it the protest for the German?
No,
protest
at all.
We were just part of the silent protest.
We're just doing a silent protest.
Okay.
Helen was there doing the holding, and just basically holding up a large sign and hoping TDs and that going in would stop and talk to us. Some actually put the head down and ran when they saw us. But Owen O'Brien, fair play to him, did come over and engage with us for quite a while, talking and everything else. But we couldn't get out of him any sort of.
What was the sign? It's just the one that you've been doing for years, like the silence to protest, or was there something in particular?
No, it was basically the women in the jail.
No males in women's jails. Okay, yeah.
No, over the last year there was varying numbers of women would stand outside the Dáil. Sometimes 6 of us, sometimes a dozen, holding a big sign, just hoping to get a bit of attention or coverage or something like that. But, that's basically what it was.
But the long version of the video is quite funny, because every time he goes to answer, he says, I believe gender identity. And, that wasn't the question. Several women at the same time are trying to correct him and say, you know, that's not the question. But they've been kind of primed. I guess they've all probably been rehearsing it now in the run up to the general election. They're probably thinking, right, we're going to get asked. And the default is to go to gender identity. So it's almost like there's a level of brainwashing that they've gone through to be able to
I almost feel bad for them, almost. Well, I think like some of the times I think what are the most effective what are the things that are the most elicit the most disgust about this movement? And the one Barbie Kardashian is a good one. Like men and women's prisons generally obviously is horrific, but that you know, this particular case in Ireland is awful. There's another thing which is like young gender non-conforming people being trans, so to speak, trans away the gay. But what I've also noticed recently is that Ireland has started to do mastectomies and hysterectomies more than what they used to. So when you look at the forums on trans health forums and whatever, they used to all have to go abroad, but now there's a couple of doctors around here and there around the country who are doing mastectomies. And I don't know about lower age limits or anything, but that would be, you know, it would be good information to get, like, is the stats on how many young women especially are getting mastectomies? Because from what I can see in the groups, there's so many of them, you know, and I feel like we need to gather that data. I'm trying to gather it at the moment for Belgium.
I think it's in the black market a little bit. So of the people that I know here, the women that I know that went down that route, they're kind of, it's a middle class issue. So they have the money and a lot of their parents just pay for them to go abroad. But actually the big thing I think that's a problem in Ireland, we're so almost, you know, the history between Ireland and England means that sometimes we like to do the opposite of what the English are doing just to piss them off. And the CAP report hasn't made its way into Ireland at all. Like I was at the GP recently and he had a young GP who was sitting in, probably in his late 20s, he had the rainbow laces on. And I said to him, what's all that about there? And he was like, oh, I just want everyone to know that I'm inclusive. And I said, what do you mean? I said, you think that children can be born in the wrong body? And he said, you know, well, we do prescribe puberty blockers for, trans individuals. And so we had a bit of a back and forth. But I said to him, well, have you seen the CAS report? And he didn't know what I was talking about. So I think the stats are hard to get. It's a good question, Roisin. I don't think the stats are being compiled, really. I think
I think how people have found them in other countries has been by insurance.
Okay.
So I've been, sorry, Julie, go ahead.
No, but I was going to say you're right there, because there was a bit of a kerfuffle in the press about a month or two ago about a 26-year-old who'd had a vaginoplasty or whatever done in England.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Started leaking or something, and he was kicking up a fuss because he went to James's and James's wouldn't deal with them. They said, you know, go to Holles Street. He said paid for by the HSE.
Yes, it's the payment abroad scheme.
The payment abroad.
Yeah.
He'd had his body works done by the paid for the HSE.
Yeah.
They will do that, as you know, for people waiting now for scoliosis or other treatments where you have to go abroad, but they're actually.
Well, because it's not seen as a cosmetic surgery, which is what it is. It's, you know, they've embraced the idea that it's a physical illness, that this person was born with these deformities. You know, the sex is the opposite sex, which is, you know, back to just how moronic it all is. You know, gender and sex are different, but then why are we cutting off your body parts? But yeah, the treatment abroad scheme has been paying for a lot of those.
Yes, the thing is, I don't think you're back to the situation because of the censoring by the media here, and particularly by RTE. Very few people would know that, you know, unless you were paying close attention. And you're back to the thing that only 9% of the Irish population is on Twitter. So you're in an echo. So
yeah, we know that's sort of what I'm saying. We know about Barbie Kardashian because it's so outrageous.
Yeah.
You know, and this is kind of, in Ireland, Barbie Kardashian is kind of the only cudgel we really have. We, like, you know, there's awful stuff happening that is just, you know, that there's awful stuff happening here. Like, I was looking at the insurance numbers for mastectomies in Belgium. because obviously nobody will answer your freedom of information request. But the insurance companies do compile them, and they're all under a specific code. And there's codes for mastectomies that are not related to the finding a tumor. And there's another code then for mastectomies that are done in the absence of a tumor, but in the presence of genetic anomalies, you know, this BRC gene or whatever. And then there's codes for absence of a tumor, absence of the genes, not declared what the reason is. And there's girls ages 15 to 19, hundreds of them every year. And it's just a little bar on a graph, you know, on an insurance printout that you have to dig to find. And it's like, it's absolutely shocking that even, you know, I'm trying to figure out where this comes from, but I'm sure that information is available in Ireland as well. Sarah, you're really good at digging for those kind of things. I think that's the sort of thing, those are the kind of stats that will work, that will work, you know, in Ireland.
I'll take it as an action item to try and I'll contact Sandra. Maybe the two of us will try.
And I mean, it's the same with, you know, the prescription of puberty blockers, like how many reimbursements were made. So now, obviously, gender GP, you lose track of them all. As you were saying, if you go private, you go on you take your flight and you do it in your private clinic in London, you're off the radar, nobody knows. But there are, you know, there are codes for the insurance or reimbursement of medicinal products, you know, and it's all being compiled by someone somewhere, not for us, but it's out there somewhere. And I think this information is really, really vital. Like, to what extent is it happening? And that's sort of why I started with that, because I've seen in these groups over the last couple of years that it used to be you had to just get out of Ireland to get everything done, but now we're having mastectomies done within the country, and more and more we're having puberty blockers within the country. And these are like, you know, I've always said this, sorry for taking over conversation already, but I've always said this, that the gender clinics, whatever the NGS is going to come out, you know, be revealed to be the new iteration of the NGS or whatever, it's all a smokescreen. You know, we have wonderful, wonderful gender clinics here and there, and there's Tavistock and the NGS, and there's every country to have all these. There's nothing stopping anyone else doing all of the treatments that are in, like, the gender clinics exist to make it look like there's a pathway where you go A, B, C, D, E, and then you finally get thing. And in the clinic, it's pluridisciplinary and it's multidisciplinary. And you've got your endocrinologists and your psychiatrists and your surgeons, and that's what makes it look like, oh, this is a thing that you're followed by a whole bunch of people and it's all part of a pathway and No, you go onto Facebook, within 5 minutes you'll find the name of the GP in Galway City who will give you what you want, you know. And if that doesn't work, you use your treatment abroad scheme, and you can go to there's 2 places in Ireland that Irish girls are going to, or sorry, 2 places abroad that they're mostly going to. They're in Warsaw and Madrid, and it's so cheap that they're, you know, I mean, it's relatively cheap, and they're flying over there the whole time getting these operations done, you know. And there's figures out there for that.
I think if more of this was publicized, I would think the Irish public would kick back about a lot of this.
Yeah.
Now, I think, you know, as in America with the thing, there's so much money to be made in these surgeries and things like that. You're naturally enough, certain people in the medical profession in Ireland or anything else are going to sort of say, well, if there's a demand for it and people are willing to pay for it, etc., etc. But I do think the use of HSE resources, where there are always, you know, waiting lists for cancer treatment, waiting lists for scoliosis, waiting lists for speech and therapy for children. But if you were to say, well, right, we're doing this, you know, we're building a man a vagina because he feels, you know, he'd be better as a woman, even though it'll make him a lifelong patient. And, you know, but the fact of the matter, because it's not covered in the Irish news, the Irish media, the RT, there's no discussion of it.
Yeah.
I don't know how you could bring it.
It's always the problem, isn't it? It's how do you get this information out there? Like, there's horrific stuff going on that, you know, nobody knows about, and here we are talking to each other about it. One day, when the scandal breaks open, and I'm convinced it will be a great source of information for people. But right now, how do we break through that wall? And I mean, you could definitely say, Tracy, maybe you can tell us what you think, but America is peaking. Donald Trump is turf in chief. The UK, they've got the law. The people are terrified of the law, and they're being watched in the UK. I think they're just doing so well. But when is Ireland gonna have its mass peaking event? Is it happening secretly? I don't know. In the US, the vibe has changed, no?
I think the vibe has changed here with the referendum. Maybe we'd be good to hear from Tracy on the post-Trump vibe, but I worked with the Wicklow women. We did a few events for the referendum, you know, in the No campaign, and we thought we were just, you know, going to be made a show of. We had no idea that the rest of the country were actually thinking the same way as we were. It's the silent majority that, for the first time in the last 4 years, since it's really kind of come to a head, they had a chance to vote on something that kind of said, no, look, I just don't like the direction this is going, because the word woman was being removed from the Constitution, and, you know, and that whole nonsense about the durable relationships, and everyone could kind of see, I think, what was behind it. So I think people have kind of woken up a bit to the idea that there's been an agenda behind the scenes. I don't think people realize quite how sinister some of it is. What I think what the Irish government and the Irish media don't realize is that Irish people look internationally at international news stories. They look to the UK, they look to America. So, you know, the politicians here won't answer the emails or the questions when we ask them, and the media won't cover it here. But I think on the ground in Ireland, a lot of people are sick of the trans agenda. They're sick of it in the schools. You know, they're aware that it's being shoved down kids' throats in schools for sure, right? I think everyone's aware of that. And I think it's, you know, it's ripe now for this election for people to ask the question. But I don't think it's the biggest issue that Irish people are worried about. So I don't think it'll be, you know, I don't think.
I don't think. Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think, because I guess there's so few people, Irish people, that are on Twitter or X or whatever. And if you're only getting your information from RTE, you haven't a clue what's going on. And it's, we need more people either on Twitter or getting, you know, these kinds of podcasts into their feed where they're actually seeing what's going on behind the scenes. Because I think, I'll just say the Trump vibe here is one of, thank God. And there's a sense of relief, palpable relief of, okay, the adults are back in the room. And somebody is actually going to look at this nonsense and look at common sense stuff. Like, you know, for us, it was the economy, it was the open borders. And I think for Ireland, I think a lot of the people looking at this open border thing is a much bigger issue for them than any of the gender stuff, because they're much more impact. You're seeing it's in your face every day. Every time I go back to Dublin, I'm like, I don't recognize the city.
Yeah. No, the city has changed so much in the last 2 to 3 years. But I do think from the trans thing, I think we will be looking, if there are in America, if there is a sea change or a kickback there, you know, it came from America. That's where the thing will turn. And we notice what happens in America, probably more so, paying more attention to it than what necessarily happens in England.
But I just like, what the big difference between the two countries is that America can take things into its own hands and do what it wants and set the agenda and make other people do things. As I was saying to you before about the hate speech bill, like, maybe you think I'm being too pessimistic, but from my vantage point, Ireland has no say. If Ireland is being told to introduce hate speech, we're going to do it. If we're being told that we have to take X amount of immigrants every year, we're going to do it. And I'm not saying that in a conspiratorial way. Agreements have been made. It's just, I feel like we can't stop it. You know, I feel like as Ireland, we're just not in as much of a position to do as much about it. You know,
what about the European, like what about the Netherlands and Italy, who are really starting to push back? But they've started to push back, and like, aren't Italy like sending some of the migrants to Albania now? Is it so they go there first? They don't just arrive in and get handed a home.
I have to say, I don't really know much of the details, but what I do know is that they're all being subjected to the exact same bullshit. Like, it's the same everywhere. Now, it's how they've reacted. Like in Belgium, it's the same. Incredible numbers. You know, they're just, people aren't as activated about it here. And in the Netherlands, you have this right-wing Geert Wilders guy that everyone is like, oh, he's the anti-Muslim guy or whatever. He's going to do something. You know, he can grandstand and he can be like Trump. He can say, I'm against this. So we'll hope that in the future that'll trickle down to some sort of policy thing. But a lot of things are sort of in motion that you can't get out of. And I don't want to sound also like I know what I'm talking about, but I only know this little bit about this subject. Is that Trump will talk all day long about keeping immigrants out, but he knows that they need those people there for work. So he's gonna be, you know, it's all, in some ways it's about messaging and it's about presentation and it's about how you arrange it all on the plate. And I mean, for some people it's enough, a little bit like Brexit or whatever, for some people it's enough just to have a leader who says, I'm not into this and I'm going to minimize it as much as I can, you know. And that's probably what, you know, these measures like in Italy, sending people back or I think that those leaders you're looking at the tools that they can use and they're saying, right, well, I've promised X, Y, Z. I can't really give X, Y because we need the people. You know, here's a funny one. Croatia is dead. Croatia has no young people because they're all in Ireland. They've all the young Croatians have all gone to Ireland to work. So there's nobody left in Croatia to work. So they need to bring in people from the Middle East. So you've got this, you know, they need to, so that their villages don't die, they need to bring these people in. And Croatians, they're just like us. They just want to go somewhere where everyone speaks English and we can make a bit of money and send it back home, you know? And it's like, with the richer we get, the more we need the people. And I'm not saying that as a defense of huge open borders or loads of people coming in, because the cultural problems are massive about that. But to go back to my original point, it was just to say that you can have a leader who has the vibes of being anti-open borders, but then what they can actually do is maybe limited. But so the vibes of Donald Trump is like, fuck this. Obviously, sorry, excuse me, Roisin, for cursing. He's obviously like, you know, there were certain things, for example, with the trans stuff that he can't do anything about, not just because it's by the states, but that's why, you know, it's all about executive orders. It's like how the federal government does business. All right, we're not going to do any more business with people who do X, Y, Z. That's what he can do, and he'll do it in his first day or whatever. But yeah, it's hard to sort of unfuck what's being fucked also, and it takes so much time and. But
But
yeah.
he has come out and said that he will prosecute. I have it in the link of even Gript also published it. He has said that he will stop the indoctrination of young children and the mutilation of children's bodies, and he will stop this indoctrination within the schools, and he will sue the doctors who are involved in the medical procedures.
How could he do that? I'm wondering, in practical terms. I understand if the Department of Education, he can do something about the curriculum because it's federal programs. That I understand. But I wonder about the doctors, because I just consider the US like the Wild West. It's like it's decentralized. It's like everyone doing whatever they want. Like I find it difficult to understand how they could get a grip on that.
Maybe what I can do is see if someone can come on and explain that to us.
That would be good, yeah.
Get somebody from America to come on and explain that to us. I think Adam Dorito would love to come on and explain that to us. He's our American correspondent. And we also have a couple of other people as well over in America who are willing to come on the Irish Political Roundup and Comfortable Women Island. So I think that's something that we can talk about going forward in the next couple of weeks. What is Donald Trump and the Trump administration going to do? How are they going to do it? And when are they going to do it? And who will be involved? So I think that's something would be good to, because if we have that information, we actually then could see how that could happen here in Ireland or in Europe. And when you think about what we did with the referendum, ladies, we were all canvassing for the referendums, all of us here. you think the polls said, oh no, the government will win. And I remember canvassing saying, no, we've got it in the bag. And people were looking at me, no, we haven't, no, we haven't, we've got it in the bag. 90% of the people were saying that they didn't agree with what was happening, and it would be a no. So I do, maybe I'm an optimist, but I think with the right, as you said earlier, Roisin, the right messaging, with the right organization, with the right people, and the right, I hate the word lobbying, but I think representation, we can get the government to start listening to we, the people of Ireland, and we women and mothers. Again, I think we can do that.
But you know what I think happened there? I honestly think the government, they've lost touch in Ireland. They thought a few years ago when they came in that they could shame us into kind of right think, right? So if you think about it, even the immigration topic, which I haven't really been paying attention to that until fairly recently, but anyone who brought it up in the Dáil, the backlash they would get, they would be immediately vilified by Leo Varadkar or whoever happened to be there, and
as xenophobic or whatever,
as hatred, far right, and this rhetoric, all these buzzwords, and I think that worked for a few years. They actually, even myself, if I saw someone tweeting about immigration, I'd be like, oh God, I don't want to be associated with them. It worked, and then I guess I started to look at it and go, right, if you're running a country, it's like running a business. It's a numbers game, right? You have a capacity that you can cater to, right? And it doesn't matter if they're wealthy or poor, but you have, there's a certain stock of housing, there's a certain amount of school places, there's a certain amount of hospital places and doctors, etc. And you can grow and scale, but you can only do it at a certain rate, and there's constraints. And so I started to see the number of centres being built, and that these weren't temporary facilities. The government really didn't have a plan. And that's when I started to get annoyed, because people weren't allowed to actually just talk about it. So it's not about, oh, don't let this person in, or don't let that person in, or this country's bad. Nothing to do with any of that. Are we doing it well? If we're bringing people in, are we doing it well? And the government have not done that very well. And I think now people are now allowed to speak about that.
I think that's exactly it, though. There were subjects you're not allowed to speak about, and then the election showed that everyone cared about them.
Yes.
And so, but then you just go, well, if everyone cared about them so much, why didn't we hear about it? It's like, well, you forbade everyone from talking about it. You called them all fascists for saying it.
If you look at their manifestos now for the general election, a lot of them now, they are coming up with plans and ideas, speed up the process, don't allow anyone in with a criminal record. If you're refused appeal, prosecute people arriving without passports, or just turn them back, etc.
But that's what we got in the States. For the last couple of months, we had Kamala Harris saying, this is what we're going to do. This is what I'm going to do on day one. I'm like, you've been in power for the last 4 years. Why didn't you do it then? Oh, because it's pandering now. It's like, oh, we need to get those votes. I'm like, yeah. I wouldn't trust any of those politicians that are saying what they're going to do if you give them their vote, because they have shown you what they have done in the past, and they haven't stood up for women. They haven't stood up for Irish people. It's offensive to be proud of your country these days. And I'm like, no, I'm sorry. I'm not racist. I'm not I'm sure people, that find out that I, voted for Trump will be, probably not very thrilled. But I voted for Hillary. I was one of the women that cried when Hillary didn't win, but I had no idea of what Hillary's policies were. I only voted for Hillary because I wanted a woman in the White House. And I saw all of that this year as well. I just want a woman in the White House. Nobody knew anything about her policies, but she wouldn't even talk about it. So I'm like, yeah. So people in Ireland, all I can say is make this vote matter. Because if you're going to vote the same crowd in, you're just going to get the same of what you've had. And if you like what you've had, fair enough. But I think people are waking up and saying, yeah. When you see Simon Harris dancing in the bloody super value,
Yeah. Like Mary Lou was dancing as well today.
I saw that, you know. They're so out of touch, and they don't even see it. But I think the vote will show them how out of touch they are, I hope.
I do have a tendency to think that politicians do learn. And I think the referendum thing was a big kick in the backside for them here. Because, you know, it was the thing. And also, of course, a general election does focus the mind greatly because, you know, but they saw the way that, you know, and that was the general thing, you know, there was a bit of kickback on Twitter, you know, the power of the NGOs. They have been advising government on policy instead of.
But they're so out of touch.
Yeah, but the way even politics have been done in Ireland years ago, you'd have a lot of party membership, you'd have party meetings, local TDs would have their office meetings and they'd be meeting people. Then with COVID, they stopped meeting people in their local constituency. They lost touch with actually what was the general sort of feeling of things. But the referendum did concentrate their minds. Yeah. And then you had the change of leadership. You had Leo, who was the very woke thing and everything else. And I think Simon is much more to the bottom line.
Well, he's reading the room better.
He reads the room.
But having said
plus
that,
he wants to maintain power.
I think it depends on who gets into coalition. Like, as I was saying, Tracy, I don't think we have an opposition here, right? I wouldn't vote for Sinn Féin. I mean, when you hear them coming out with, you know, we'll make the price of the average house 300,000. Number one, you haven't the means to do that. But number two, how does the person who just paid $500,000 feel about that? I mean, they don't know their arse from their elbows. You wouldn't trust them to run the country. So we don't have a position. So I think the best chance we have is getting the Greens out, because they've been the tail wagging the dog. Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil come back into the centre and from this far left. I think Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael saw votes on the left. They thought they'll go over there and scoop them up. But actually, those people on the far left don't vote Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael anyway. So you went over there and you lost your core voters. And I think come back to the middle, get rid of this green wokery, and have the balls to say what a woman is. Have the balls to say men shouldn't compete in women's sport. I mean, my kids in secondary school now, you know, there's boys in playing hockey with the girls. Now, none of them have been playing against my daughter yet, and God help them if that happens. I would be straight in there. But, you know, the golf club down the road there last month in Greystones, there was a grown man in the women's changing rooms. And you have a scenario, that golf club in particular, the young junior boys are not allowed into the men's changing rooms up to the age of 18 because the men feel, you know, they walk around, men aren't like women. Men apparently walk around changing rooms naked, and women, we're all kind of holding our towel over ourselves, trying to get dressed and not upset anybody or ourselves if we catch a glimpse of ourselves. But the men walk around naked while they're getting dressed. And so there's a rule that the junior boys go to a different area and aren't allowed in with the junior or in with the men for the boys' protection and for the men's comfort. But a grown-ass man of 60 odd, 6'3", is allowed to go into the golf club in the ladies now, into the ladies' change room, and he did, right?
But can I just to come back to what you were saying about the NGOs there, how did we get here? How did we get to the situation where, you know, these super centrist old school parties ended up bowing to these absolute nutcases, and so now we've got lads walking around naked in the women's changing room. The NGOs,
the National Council of Ireland, doesn't it? They have not been representing us.
If I was the government, if I were the ministers in the government in the last few years, I'd be really pissed off with the NGOs, because what they're supposed to do is to represent us. So, you know, you were talking about going around meeting your constituents, and that stopped during COVID. Like these NGOs, and it's such a pejorative word now in Ireland. I love it. Like NGOs is a bad word. Like it really is. They are supposed to represent us to make it easier. And I mean, if we were to organize, and like if we were like, you know, TERFs United, whatever, Irish TERFs for the general election 2024, it would make sense that, you know, we're all in work, and Roisin, you'd go and you'd represent us, and you'd say, well, I'm a stakeholder, I'm a civil society stakeholder, I represent TERFs of Ireland general election 2024. Here are demands, here's my letter and stuff. So that's the old model. It's almost like this, you know, like pre
Activists, but I think the word activist is now, you know, a word we're all well aware
Yeah.
of. 5 years ago, if you would have thought of these NGOs, you knew that, you know, there was people there who were passionate, but you
Yeah.
felt that they were actually, as you say, Roisin, listening to the people they were supposed to represent. And
Yeah, it was very different back in the day because I did a lot of research about this. Why are there so many NGOs in Ireland? And I'm sure you've all read this, that like because we had nothing because the church ran everything, and then as soon as the church was gone, the charities had to take over. So there are all these charities, and these charities sort of, you know, the free legal aid clinic, the famous free legal aid clinic, that was because people were getting shafted left, right, and center, and they were too poor to do anything about it. So it was a perfect example of an organic organization that sprung up out of Trinity College, where people said, you know what, on my day off, I'm going to help poor people. So and those people were dedicated. They weren't activists, but I suppose you could call them activists, because they were saying, I'm using my spare time to help the woman who has full custody of the kids and can't get payments off the ex, whatever, you know, I'm going to help them not get kicked out of the house and all that stuff. That's the legacy of FLAC. What FLAC is now is that the government sort of sees these organizations and they say, we need to make it look like we have the consensus of the people to do the things that we're going to do. But we're also like, it's this horrific symbiosis where like organization like the National Women's Council, if you look at what they're working on at the moment, there's nothing there that isn't what the government is also aligned on. The whole thing has become so corrupted. We're so far from like, you know, like our situation right now, we could, as I said, we could be going to them with letters, and we do, or FLAC guys, young lawyers in Trinity back in the 60s, 70s or whatever, or David Norris or other gay people, you know, photocopying things in their day job and trying to spread them around town of a Saturday and stuff. That was the genesis of what has now become in Ireland, just like this organ of the state that depends so much on the money to, because I just want to come to the word activist, because I find this word really not really suitable, actually. They're not, the NGOs are staffed not with activists. We use that term pejoratively as well, because we say these extremist activists have got these 6'3" lads walking around our changing rooms. They're not activists, they're careerists. They're people who want to stay in a job, and we live in a knowledge society now. They're never going to produce anything. They're not going to work as waitresses. So what they're going to do is they're going to work in these sort of careers that have an ethical aspect. And I was saying this on Twitter the other day, saying you believe trans women are women is almost like going to get a professional certification. It's almost like your badge of certification, where you say, I say this thing, I've completed that course, I've swallowed that bullshit, and I'm pretending to believe it now, hire me. Like, that's all this is.
I can bring it to your organization, but it's exactly like, if you look at the Mary Hayes is one of the main activists, I call her now, working in Women's Aid, and she moved from the National Women's Council, the Women's Aid, and then straight up in Women's Aid you see the campaign starting, you know, trans acceptance, trans women are women, and all of these kind of little videos where she's going around asking the staff, you know, to explain about trans women being women and things. So I think you're right. It's a badge of wokery, and they put it on their CV, and then someone in the incoming organization feels like, well, we have to be inclusive because, you know, we have to tick our DEI tick box now. So, we'll take them in. Sure, they just went and brought the, you know, inclusivity into that place, and
but
so
they tend to
move from one to the other.
They do tend, because they're it's moving with the internet. What's happening with the National Women's Council now? I mean, you're getting from them. I was reading their manifesto there during the week, and they're not. It's full of all sorts of, you know, pious aspirations.
Climate change.
But it has got really nothing that's specifically, very little that's specifically the interests of women, like women's spaces, women's sport, the dangers of surrogacy or anything else to women. It's talking about, you know, universal healthcare and tenant protection things. And they're now going on to climate and in the environment. And
well, you see, sorry to interrupt, but the government goes to these meetings every few years, and then they're told, okay, introduce a national climate plan, introduce a national gender plan, introduce a national this strategy. So they come home and they say, how do we outsource to someone? And they pick NWCI and they say, can you do something on women and climate? And they're like,
north-south thing, women from the north, etc., getting, uniting with the north of one island type thing and all this. And it's really their original mission statement has gone by the wayside, and it's just basically then they're
fulfilling the
looking,
political,
yeah.
yeah, they're fulfilling the political aspirations of the people who are paying their funds. Nothing else. Like, they're basically just another arm of the government doing.
But they all are. They are all. The Women's Council of Ireland are all former members of staff of the Labour Party and Sinn Féin. So when political parties or TDs don't get re-elected, their staff goes to the NGOs. So they're still pushing the political agendas within the NGOs. So they're pushing these political agendas from within.
It's so fake. The
So
whole thing is such a sham.
For women let's just say, like, when this video goes out this week and women and their partners and people are watching this, who has women on their agenda for this election? Who has women and children and all of what we're talking? Who is anyone? Like, this should be a very simple. We know people are getting fed up with it, the normal everyday people. So are they talking about women's spaces? Are they the only ones that are? Because it seems to me like Fianna Fáil, everyone else is just, other than a couple of independents, it's not on any of their radar because they don't think we're clued in enough. So Aintu are the only ones that are actually speaking out.
Aintu are, and then if you look at
a few independent senators like Ronan Mullen, and
a few
things
independent
like that.
TDs that are running. But I think that the thing is they're I mean, even if they want to say it, they're not making it front and center of their campaign. It's more when you question them, you can corner someone. I don't think they realize, that quite like Trump did, that it's something that could get him an extra 2 or 3% or 5%. I'd love to know how many people moved from previously, like yourself, voting Democrat to on this issue.
Well, I was Labour Party. I was the women's officer for Conor Kilkenny. I left in 2017. I thought it was 16, but it was 2017. I left there. And so, because of the woke agenda, and they weren't representing women, it was just being pushed through. And as again, what was mentioned earlier on, they were not representing their core voters. Labour Party were going for the middle class voters and excluding their own core values and their bases, and that made room for Sinn Féin. It's like they all moved at pace to bring people, so the other parties would come in and move their woke agenda. And Tracy, it's really interesting. You were a Democrat. What was your deciding factor, or how did you, was it a slow process, or was it a light bulb moment that you were a Democrat voting Republican and a MAGA woman and a Trump voter?
Yeah, I mean, there was no light bulb moment, but it was a process of watching what was happening, and then, and I will, can I just show that this is such a So for anyone who's trying to figure out where the Dems went wrong in America, this will tell you. It's, I guess when you're talking to people and you talk to them about, like in California, there's like men are in women's prisons. There's like an increase in HIV, like pregnancies, and people will say, I don't think that's happening. And I'm like, okay, where are you getting your news from? Because here it's like, if you're only watching CNN, and that's what I was doing. I was watching CNN. I was watching Fox News. Fox is the devil. All they care about is Trump, So it was a process of watching what was going on here, and with women's rights just disappearing, and the woke agenda just getting bigger and bigger. I found like I was politically homeless. I'm like, I can't in all conscience vote Democrats, even though, there's the abortion rights piece. I was trying to figure which is the bigger issue for women. I thought, well, if they can't even define what a woman is, then abortion rights, we gotta leave that aside for a minute. But it was, I just kind of, the longer I kind of looked at what was happening here, and then looking at what was going on internationally, and really, I questioned myself so many times, like, am I really going to vote for this man? This man who I believed all the hype, and I feel a bit angry about that as well. The fact that I feel like the media lied to me. No, I think it's Kelly J. Keane had a great, she posted last week saying, you know, for one of the kind of responses last week was, you know, how could you vote for a rapist? You know, how could you possibly put that man, this rapist in the White House? And like, whatever you think about his, you know, interactions with women, and he's in there now because we're trying to get the rapists out of the women's prisons.
Yeah.
And with the Democrats keeping, you know, it was just gonna get a million times worse. So going from politically homeless to thinking, oh my God, am I really gonna do this? But when I got information from both sides, I'm so pissed off that I swallowed all of the bullshit from fucking CNN and I didn't question it, you know. And
You're
now,
talking about like Russiagate era type stuff.
yeah.
Like that sort of thing. Mm.
So and then I started getting onto X, and then when Elon Musk took over, and it was like, okay, now people can speak freely, and it just became more and more obvious that maybe I was wrong about him.
It's
And
hard,
I'm,
it's hard for you to get it right in America. Like as I was
Yeah.
saying before, like I was there last week in New York just before the election, and we were watching, we'd watch half an hour of CNN late at night, and then half an hour of Fox News, and just your jaws on the ground watching it, because on both sides, it's just it's propaganda. It's not news. And you're kind of going, well, I know that's it, you know, dramatized, and I know that's dramatized, and you're left to your own devices to kind of go, well, what's real and what's not real, and you know, look, I'm no fan of Trump. You know, the grab him by the pussy thing before. I remember when that happened in 2016. I was like, there's no way this man can win. There's no way. And I, like you, was devastated when he won. And I don't like the man particularly. I would hate to be stuck in a lift with him and have him showing me his gold, you know, apartment if I happen to call in or anything. But but they have driven the annoying thing, watching all the hysterical Democrats shaving their heads and everything now.
Yeah.
And people, you know, people kind of, you know, on the brink of suicide and catastrophizing, you know, that they're going to be rounded up and murdered. The thing is that they themselves drove the voters to Trump's door because they have been so hysterical and unreasonable and embracing, you know, here I think I'd say Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil have kind of maybe tolerated the Greens agenda on the trans thing. But in America, you know, you see them putting that Rachel Levine into that role, the first ever female, you know, admiral, you know,
Unforced errors.
yeah. And then that the fella who robbed the women's dresses, the baldy lad in the red dress, you know, and then you've the Dylan, she sent a letter last year. This is when I was like, I will vote Trump. If I ever had a chance 10 times over instead of Kamala Harris. She sent Dylan Mulvaney on his birthday a letter. You're so brave and so inspirational. A man doing a mockery who will never face the realities of the horrors of how to navigate. I mean, on the radio today, there was women up the north talking about how they're taking self-defense classes because the violence up there, and there's a man going around attacking women with knives even during the day. I mean, to navigate the world as a woman, it's dangerous just for leaving the house. Doesn't matter what you're wearing. And she's platforming this idiot. And instead of all of the women who maybe survived cancer or are carers that she could have written a letter to. So I say, screw them. They deserve everything they
and
got.
I think that, you know, this video that went viral earlier this week, and it was some guy from some LGBT org, and he was fighting against a guy who was some sort of GOP lad, and one of them said, people don't like boys and girls sports teams or whatever, and the guy flipped out and he was like, they are not boys, you know, this thing.
saw that.
And it really did the rounds, and it was basically somebody saying something completely normal, and then some activist guy saying trans women are women, like, you know, and losing the plot and being completely immature and stuff. And then one of his arguments, if you were able to listen to it over his shrieking, was, you're talking about a tiny proportion of the population, like how many boys have taken girls' spots or whatever. And I think this really encapsulates it. I don't think normal people care if it's never happened, if it's just a proposal on a piece of paper for now. They don't want the principle of it. They don't want anyone who holds that principle or who believes that that would be a decent policy to have any power. So it wouldn't matter if, I think we're now at 900 trophy medals and counting in the US for sports medals that have been taken off girls. And that's not counting the places that have been lost. That's just counting the medal work.
You know, Roisin, it only takes one man, right? In the golf, I know 2 golf clubs now who have men who say they're women. And those men have destroyed those golf clubs for the ladies section. The women avoid those times. They won't play with him. It has ripped the club in half because there's a few handmaidens who are kind of, you know, he's a woman. And it only takes one man to destroy an entire club and make it a place where women feel uncomfortable. So even if it's a tiny proportion.
Even if it's, yeah, the numbers don't matter. But what I'm sort of saying as well is that, what does it say about that man that he's taken that place of a woman? That's one thing. What does it say about those women around him, fellow members of the club that let him and fight for him to be there? That's another thing. What does it say about the administration that says this is a thing that we will allow? You know, people look at that and they say, that's not a club I want to belong to, because that's the type of people that they are. And I think that that's what, you didn't need to know anything about Leah Thomas. You just need to have heard maybe faintly that something like that was going on, that's something about breastfeeding, something about men and women's prisons, and go, nah, you don't need to know stats. You know, at some point, I think people in the US were just like, it's the principle of it. And so at that point, you almost sort of start to think like all this data gathering that we do, sometimes it's like people are against the principle of it. We just don't know it because we're not allowed to talk about it. So the stats, we're getting stats because we're trying to get journalists to pick it up and saying, hey, did you see like this many rapes in a women's ward last year? It's like, that's because we're trying to break through to media. But I think regular people just knowing that it's happening or that somebody's proposing, just knowing that Kamala Harris once, even for a second, considered it acceptable, even if there were no men and women's prisons at all, it's the vibes of it. And I think Donald Trump has the vibes of, I will never do that, whether it's because he's like that personally or because he knows it's a winning strategy.
Don't you think it's a trust issue too? When I look at Kamala Harris, I've seen clips of her with the pronouns. I'm wearing a blue suit and my pronouns, and this letter to Dylan Mulvaney. She knows it's bullshit.
She knows it's bullshit, yeah.
She knows it's bullshit. And I look at Owen O'Brien in that video with my mum, and he's, you know, hot on the hop, and he tries to start
like a rabbit in headlights.
Yeah, and he starts going on about what gender identity is. He knows it's bullshit.
If you can't say what a woman is, how can you run a country?
Trust these people. You can't, if you're willing to lie about something so fundamental and so basic.
That's it.
You know, so black and white, then you don't deserve to hold any power. You really don't, because you are susceptible to a cult. And you know what? You're going to tell
it's gone so far the other way. People are like, enough already. Can we just get back to usual programming? You know, it's gone so far that people
before the transitioner numbers start to rise to the point that people can't deny that that's a thing, you know.
And also the fact we've interviewed county councillors, and I've been asking them, what about the education, the SPHE? Only one county councillor so far, or candidate for the general election, has said it was a good thing. And it was the Labour Party candidate here locally. We spoke to the other candidates, and they said, here in Kilkenny, that a female, it was Mary Hilda Kavanagh, Fine Gael, read it out in the county chambers, the local county council, read it out, and they were all horrified. And they said, yes, you know, and I said, I've seen, you know, I've seen pictures of the textbooks. I've seen it for myself. It's not hearsay. And now, only a couple of weeks ago, they started to take it seriously. They started to read the textbooks and see what was in, and they started to see that there's a lot of pushback from parents to the county councillors and the TDs saying this is not acceptable. But is it because there's a general election coming up that they're starting to say, okay, we're getting pushed back at the doors about the SPHE and the children, indoctrination of children? And you know, they say, so they're starting to take notice now, because many people, like what we are all doing on Twitter, what we're doing on the social media, what we're doing here, is we're starting to make it public. We're starting to get other people talking about it because we've been pushing it and getting people talking about it and sending photos to people. Look, this is in the books. We're not listening to the PR washy-washy fakery that government departments are sending out at their press conferences.
That's it. The SPHE content was just such a body blow. I mean, it was really well done to whoever it was that uncovered that. I didn't follow it too closely, but that Barbie Kardashian, couple of other things, you know, and you put this in the face of passing politicians, they can't avoid it for long, you know. And it's like, it kind of makes me laugh, this idea of these seasoned turfs, like stopping this guy, Owen O'Brien, was it? And saying and telling him this thing, and him then reeling off his Wikipedia definition of gender that he just looked up like the week before because he's freaked out about getting asked about it. And it's like these war battle turfs just being like, we know all about the definition, sweetheart. Like, you know, have you heard about the prisons? Have you heard about the porn in the kids' school books? Like, it's incredible. We've had years to, like, we could all write a PhD in this topic now. And they're just sort of saying, oh, shite, I better Google it, you know, and it's just like, we're ready for them. We just need more platforms to.
Yeah.
And thank God for Gript.
Yeah.
Politicians will educate themselves on it. But I think that was part of the thing that Ronan Mullins in the Senate during the week there, when he was talking to that Patrick.
Oh yeah, Patrick from the
Patrick O'Sullivan, wasn't it? Yeah.
And basically, but how a civil servant like that, but in a highly placed one, you know, Sandra Adams had pointed out how to Ronan Mullen how the words, you know, it had gone from sexual orientation to sexual identities as it was transferred from sort of the.
And Patrick was convinced that it was in the Equal Status Act,
And yeah,
but you see, you know what that is? Penny. So if we go back to how did we get here? So the Gender Recognition Act passed. I think.
But was that a deliberate thing?
No, it is.
A deliberate thing to you know, sexual orientation replaced with sexual identities.
In some cases, it's not deliberate. It's Penny and belong to, because I've been doing FOIs for 4 years now, right? And these NGOs who are very influential, who have this agenda, whose agenda has been trans, and sometimes they have other letters in there, but actually the agenda is, you know, dismantle sex, replace it with gender anywhere you can. And once you start bringing it in as gender, then people get confused, right? So they have been in their ear, and you can see it in the FOIs. You can see Tenny and Belong To involved in the curriculum. You can see them working with IBEC. So, for example, with IBEC issued, they have 38,000 organizations signed up and they get membership from them.
What's IBEC, Sarah? Sorry, can you remind me?
Business, maybe Google it there. Employers.
What is it? An employers association or something? Or
yeah, so they basically are they're a body who work with organizations who are employers around the country, and they advise.
Okay.
They work with the HR department of each organization, and they'll say, you know, things like employer rights and responsibilities,
advising employers.
Yeah, and so, you know, companies don't want to end up in the WRC or whatever, so they'll work with them on this. But they sent a guideline around and a template for a trans policy, and it had the branding of Tenny on it. And in there it said, you know, you must accommodate someone according to their gender identity. And if there's any questions from the staff, you must educate them, but under no circumstances are you not to accommodate them in the bathroom of their gender identity. Now, we all know that this is men that they're talking about here, because, you know, if a woman thinks she's a man and goes into the men's toilets, she's not at any risk, or sorry, the men aren't at any risk, and she's probably likely not going to do that anyway. And if she does, you know, she's putting herself at risk. But it's, you know, it was very forcefully written to make sure that men who said they were women would be facilitated and accommodated. But IBEC was misinterpreting. I wrote to them, I said, the Equal Status Act allows for women to have single-sex provisions, creating a situation where an employer could end up with a complaint from a woman and she could cite the Equal Status Act and actually take you to court, because
This is what happened with Alison Bailey, no? Isn't this exact the situation that Alison Bailey's, whoever it was listening to Stonewall law? What you're talking about there is Tenny law.
Penny is the same
Stonewall,
thing.
yeah. Well, I mean, the thing is, there hasn't been a case in Ireland because, and I know lots of women who, because I talk about this a lot, even if it's not at the topic of the night, I manage to squeeze it in, who have men who have been accommodated, who've transitioned during COVID. I don't know what the hell happened when COVID kicked off, but all of a sudden everybody has a trans, a man who says he's a woman in the workplace and in their family and in their circle of friends. But they, they're like, oh yeah, and he comes into the toilets and, we're not allowed to say anything. And IBEC, and the NCCA and all of these groups have been working with Tenny, and Tenny have misinterpreted purposely what the law says. And everyone's just adopted it verbatim. And,
Stonewall law, yeah.
I just wish more women, I mean, as if I encounter it, if it impacts me or my daughter, the thing about the law is you can't just take a case and go, I think the policy of
You need to
the golf club is
standout.
wrong, or my employer is wrong. You need to have it have impacted you.
Yeah.
And so you just need some women to go, well, actually, I don't want to have to leave the changing room. Or, I had a row with someone on Twitter during the week. It was a woman who works in RTE. I can't remember her name. She's a DJ. And I said to her, what happens up in the pool when I'm getting undressed and there's a man who says he's a woman there? And she said, well, if you don't like it, you should have to leave. So some women are.
Why should you leave?
Why should I leave? So
it's the women's changing rooms.
So some women are leaving and just getting on with it and going, but it'll get to a critical mass, I think. Well, there's so many of them seem to be appearing.
Yeah, because there's a lot of fucking transvestites out there. There is a lot of them. Like I'm a member of all these transvestite, crossdresser, transsexual, transgender groups on Facebook for men.
I'm glad you used the word transvestite. I do think we need to get rid of the trans woman. I think the woman bit confuses people who are not.
Well, you know why I say it? Because so I've always seen that all these men have a different story for themselves. None of them can agree with each other on what they are. There's no two men who dress up as women who have come to a consensus on what it is that they have or they are. There are as many opinions on what trans is as there are transvestites, and so a lot of them do still call themselves transvestites. A lot of them call themselves transsexuals, and all these lads, they're all like, and so here, this is just to put in with something I wanted to bring up separately actually tonight, is like, I'm really worried that we're at a pivotal point now where as more normies get peaked and people look around to understand what happened, how did we get here, what is trans, I'm very, very worried about who's going to get the mic. And I was saying to Kara Dansky the other day, like, get out there, please. Like, she's the perfect representative in the US, because it's the US that's going to be, what set me off was this Phil Illy guy, the blue dress guy who threw a grenade in Genspect. This guy invited himself on Joe Rogan after JD Vance spoke about AGP, and he said, I'll come on to Joe Rogan, to all those millions of listeners, and I'll explain AGP. And I was like, do not get that guy anywhere near. Like, we need to. So what I'm concerned about is that there are, like, the spoiled enbies and the university queers, they all have their own definition of what they are and stuff, but more normal people are going to be like, what is this thing? And so you've got all of these like competing narratives, and even amongst TERFs, like, you have all these different narratives of like, what are we, what is it that we explain to the world? I'm really, really worried about which one is going to emerge out on top. I'm really, really worried that AGP is going to be decided to be just another variation of human sexuality. But so, sorry, just to go back, I go to all these Facebook groups because I want to see what they're doing. I want to know what they want. And the only reason I'm unethically joining all these groups to spy on what these people are doing is because no researchers are doing it, because they would lose their positions in their universities if they ever proposed such a thing, to try and figure out what is the profile of these men. There are so many groups, hundreds of them pop up every day, and they are men, and they are normal, and they are married, and they are everywhere. And like, you know, some of it is really disturbing because you can see a man sort of get himself addicted to this thing. Like, I know some people say it's all porn, it's all porn. I'm not sure that it's all porn, but it's definitely a huge part of it. They're getting themselves into this thing. There is more and more and more of these men leaning into their obsession every day. They're going to be everywhere in a couple of years. Like, I see, there's some weeks that go by, I see one a day. Like, and I'm talking about a cross-dressing fetishists.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about one of the gay, twinky, cute ones. I'm talking about the manky, like, you know, and they are everywhere, and they're gonna be everywhere, and everyone's going to see them. And you know, this is like, it's going to explode, and we need to figure out, like, maybe in Ireland, I know there's been some differences between different people and within the movement and stuff. You need to have a spokesperson ready to talk about what this is. You need to have points, talking points. You need to, you know, like, we have to be ready for it, because I have a feeling it's going to be like an avalanche of people, first of all, semi-apologizing or like backing down or walking back some previous statements, but they're also going to want to understand, like, you know, because the narrative since the 1990s has been, oh, they're poor suffering men trapped in women trapped in men's bodies. We're saying no, it's not, and they're going to say, well, what is it then? And I'm really worried about who gets to describe it.
I think that's a very important point there. Very important, because you get the wrong people on the wrong platforms saying the wrong thing, and then the public who are not well informed are going to believe their interpretation of what they're putting out. And I think this is why this format on the YouTube channels is important, because we need to get the women who like yourselves, who have been there and fighting this fight and getting the fact checks. Julie, you've been there at the start. Sarah, you were there and you had the issues and everything else, and you do the FOIs. And Roisin, as a journalist, you've been investigating, doing investigative work. And Tracy, you're a midwife, and none of this makes sense. You know, it's absolutely crazy. But I think going forward, this is what we need to do: get all these facts out there and make sure, you know, that, and so people have somewhere to go to fact check information and get information from women. So I've got a cat going crazy in here. And so they are listening to women. And so other women will speak up, and other women will stop being silenced, sidelined, or erased. And because our rights are being erased. And we're beginning as women to be invisible in our own women's bodies, like breastfeeding. You know, look at the lady, I can't pronounce it, was in the Daily Mail last night, who set up I can't pronounce that.
Yeah, Marion Thompson, was it? That left because of men breastfeeding. I mean, that's what
you're a midwife, Tracy. You're a midwife by trade. Are you still working as a midwife?
No, not here in the US. But I work as a doula, so I'm I'm in all the with all the birth groups and totally captured here. So it is going to be interesting to see the next couple of months, especially some of the bigger organizations that went full tilt into the ideology, how they're going to backtrack now, because they've lost the trust of.
Are you talking about like Planned Parenthood or completely other organizations? You mean
no, like other, like the childbirth organizations, Donate International. There's a couple of them that just drank the Kool-Aid, but not in a way that, like, if you're a doula or you're a midwife and you're like, your practice is supposed to be evidence-based. You know, you can't be an evidence-based doula if you think men can get pregnant, which they can't, and everybody knows they can't. But it was all this virtue signaling of, oh, we need to look like we're inclusive, we're being kind.
The word inclusive. So, like, they decided, whoever they is, that all of these men in all of their different variations, as Roisin's so well describing, you know, they're all coming at it from different reasons, be it porn, be it that they did genuinely have a confusion or genders, be it that whatever. They're all coming to this place of, I'm a woman, and we're supposed to have redefined, I mean, it's absolutely outrageous, what a woman is. We've had, as long as I've known, I mean, I'm 50, and as long as I've known, what we've been doing is trying to expand out, you know, what is acceptable for women to do. You know, we don't have to look a certain way. We don't have to do a certain role. You know, we can have kids, we can work, we can do whatever we want. We can, you know, nobody's in charge of us, we're in charge of ourselves. And then out of nowhere, this idea that actually what makes a woman are all of these different weird things that these men are doing. And we have to just get back to basics and go, every single one of them are men. And they're expanding out what's normal for men to do. They are all categories of men.
Yeah.
And they have done great work in expanding out the boundaries of what's acceptable for men to do out in public. And that's it. And they are nothing to do with us. We have to get really hard line. I don't care who I offend now. I mean,
Yeah.
4 years ago when I arrived on the scene, I used to say, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Oh, did I hurt someone's feelings? I don't care.
The only problem, Sarah, is that we're going to be coming up against a lot of people now who are in the position that you were in 4 years ago and that I was in 4 years ago. And if I'm worried that if we push too hard, then we might lose them. So I think there's a very delicate bit where we just go, yeah, I understand the pronouns thing, and I understand how, yes, some of them do suffer quite a lot. However, you know, it's like, I'm a little bit worried that we'll like screaming like, just say man, like, because if somebody had shouted that at me a few years ago, I would have been like, okay, these people are extremists. So I'm not talking about you personally, but I'm talking about myself even.
I can't stand it. If I see her or him, he, I move on.
But there
I
is
just
the thing
move on.
that
Sorry,
there'll
Judy.
be a hard look story of some, you know, mentally affected or delusional person, and you'll be like kicking a puppy if you call him.
Bad case, make bad law. That's how we got
That's
here.
it, but
That's how we got here.
That's how we got here, yeah.
It is true,
women,
but the thing about it is that this is, I get what you're saying, that the thing is, we have to sort of tread carefully
right.
that you're not seen to be like kicking
Well,
a puppy.
well, the thing
because
is,
you have this person who's obviously mad, you know, delusional, like.
but I get what you're saying, Roisin, and I remember the first time I heard someone saying trans-identified male, and I remember shuddering and thinking, God, that's so cruel, right? So you're right, there is a path, there is a pathway, but it's so bad now though, because I think
Because we did all that.
many women did that, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And the more you accommodate this and go, well, I let that go, and kind of I'll draw the line here. No, we just need to get back to basics. These are men who are all expanding out, you know, how they live their lives. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really simple then. And they are ways to live as a man. Lots of men now are deciding to have cosmetic procedures to make themselves look and sound a certain way. And they're men doing things that men want to do. They are nothing to do with women. They are nothing. They're not our problem. They're not our obligation. Why have we ended up in this situation where we're supposed to mind them and make them feel better and soothe them?
Well, what about minding and soothing the newly peaked though? Because fuck the AGPs, obviously, but the newly peaked, I'm worried that
Yeah.
you know, I've had people look at me like I'm a monster when I've told them, oh, I write about gender issues.
Would these people be happy with that picture you posted today? I was nearly in tears of the man, dirty old man with a full beard and these moobs, and the Lalesh League are advising him on how to breastfeed a baby. This is child abuse.
Yeah.
I mean, 5 years ago, if you had a 60-year-old man with putting a baby on his engorged breasts, you'd be right to call the police. And now someone's going to vilify me for having a problem with it. I think it's gone so far because women have,
well, particularly something
over.
like Lalesh League, which would have been a very respected sort
what about
of.
the rights of the baby?
I know.
What about why are men's rights? So where we are in Ireland now, you know, as I keep pointing out, there is a hierarchy. The hate speech laws again are reinforcing it. That, you know, as I said to one of my daughters to try and describe, you know, why I have a problem with the hate speech, the hate crime laws. That if, you know, if she was at a bus stop now and my son was at a bus stop now and someone who identified as the opposite sex was at a bus stop, if someone came up and attacked the 3 people at the bus stop, the sentence would be firmer for the person who had identified as the opposite sex. So what you've created there is a category of special rights, a hierarchy of rights, and people now are not equal. So this whole thing of we want everyone to be equal, that's not what's happened here. You know, so you have to go back to the basics and go, you know, at some point we have to go back to embracing reality and
Well, maybe you're right, and just say, yeah, it's just,
I'm at
yeah.
the stage where, you know what, I maybe it's post-menopause, and the menopause just where I had no more bleeps to give, no more F's to give. You know what? It was like, and I've stopped worrying what other people think. I think we need to do this to protect women and protect children and not feed into this false fakery. And it was like the fake feminism, you know, that came from Hollywood, came from all the same places to as a stepping stone to where we are today. You know, so I think we need to protect the children. We need to protect our young teenagers and our young women and the babies coming that are here. And it's up to us women. It's up to us women to actually stop all this.
I
It's
think,
down to us.
yeah, I think the situation we had a few years ago was what Helen Joyce always says: if you mess up at the beginning of an equation, you put a 0 where there should be a 1 or whatever. I can't remember how she described it. You'll just get nonsense out the other end. And so she, as a mathematician, sat down and said, okay, well, if you say male can be females, you put it through the computer machine, and out the other end you get males in women's prisons. And that was the theory. That was a hypothesis. And then that happened already years ago now with Isla Bryson and stuff. But now the garbage in, garbage out, the garbage out is coming in a torrent right now, because we had this story about this breastfeeding guy on a bus a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. And then there was a paper circulating about a case report in Canada as well at the same time. Now we've just got like if you go into that Facebook group that I'm in, and it's called relactation and something, it's like when you've stopped and you're restarting or you're starting brand new to lactate, it's full of trans people. Like, it's full of men. It's full of it. It's nothing new about it. And then you've also got like, there's other groups I've seen. I mean, it's common now. So we've got this avalanche of garbage out. And so we need to find it, put it on a platter, put it in people's faces, you know, because it's not, you know, we need, it's all the hypotheses have come true. We were right. TERFs were right, Jar. Like, we were absolutely right. We just need to gather that and show it and say, remember, we said this to you and you thought we were scaremongering, or you said that it would never happen, or you said that very few of them would happen, or you said that it would happen, be okay. Well, look at this man, look at that photo I posted today and tell me, is that okay? You know, like, and visual is better. Those kind of pictures, when I find that stuff, like,
that photo.
But if it's
That
not
photo speaks volumes, that Roisin, that one that you put out. And it was like a year ago, because for anyone who's watching in Ireland, it was about a year ago when I made the comment on Twitter that men should not be breastfeeding. And the doulas in Ireland decided I was transphobic instead of protecting children.
that's crazy.
Yeah. And that was, and I was being cancelled from a lactation consultant who was like, of course men can breastfeed, and why wouldn't they? And I was the transphobe, you know, because I suggested, well, is anyone actually, who's safeguarding these babies?
Were they very young, the people who cancelled you?
Yeah. Attempted cancellation.
But there's a generation. I think my kids are now, they're young teenage. Well, they're spanning 13 to 17, so I've actually all ages covered and one in the middle. They think it's rubbish, right? Now they've obviously got me as mother, and my mother here beside me is their granny. But I've spoken to lots of their friends. You know, they think it's rubbish. They're looking, but there's a generation in the middle between me and them that I think whatever happened there, they fell for it. They thought they were,
Gen Z, I guess.
yeah, they thought they were,
Children's age.
yeah.
My daughter's 32. She's a doctor. My son's 28. My daughter will be 33 in January. And it's only now that she's coming around to say, you know, or maybe this or maybe that. But we were at loggerheads for years over all this. I was transphobic, and I said, well, I'm a woman and I'm a mammy and I gave birth and I know the difference between a boy and a girl and a man and a woman, you know. And I think that's that generation, because I'm talking to an awful lot of teenagers, you know, around that age, 16 and to 12. The 12-year-olds are starting to think it's cool to talk about transgender and gender fluid. However, it's the 18 to the 14 who've had enough of it. They're sick of being the social inclusion within school, but they're being excluded, and it's being rammed down their throats within the school. So, and I was over at the gym. I changed gyms recently for something similar to all this, but that will be another program. And in the gym, it was all windows, and I lived beside the school. And Roger O'Gorman was down for the school, and all the flags and everything else was out. I went, God, why is all the school children, about 200 school children, walked to the watershed and were walking around the track? And I went, aha, those children and those parents did not permit them to be in the school this afternoon.
Mm.
And so then I started talking to them. Oh, yeah. And they started telling me, and they're delighted to have people outside the schools and the principals. And then you have to wonder, who is paying who, and why are teachers pushing this? So we have to follow, as they say,
I think the very simple answer to that is that funding is made available based on laws. There's a blogger or a podcaster or whatever in the US called Richard Hanania. Maybe you know him, Tracy. He's very conservative. He's a bit annoying. But he wrote this book, and the book was essentially based on an essay that he had written, and it was Woke is the Equality Act. And basically what he's saying is all woke is equality legislation. And what he's saying is that once you had equality legislation like we have in Europe, like you have in the US, it's the Equality Act. No, sorry, it's Equality Act here. It's the Civil Rights Act where you are. In the Civil Rights Act, you have all these rules about representation, quotas, anti-discrimination, protected characteristics. And as federal government, you have to obey all those laws. Any contractors who work for federal government have to obey all those laws. So in the institutional level, woke is just enforcing and implementing legislation. And every time you've got legislation, it comes with policies, and policies come with funding. So basically what you've got is like Roderick O'Gorman saying, okay, we've got like a $1.5 million fund for LGBTQI rainbow projects, because that's a priority now in 2016 or whatever, who opened the floor to proposals. So a school can ask for, okay, give us 40 grand so that we can do an LGBTI inclusion thing. It's the money. We stop the money, this whole thing is over. You know, the money is there because it's in the legislation. If we can, like, you even saw a direct line to this. The NWCI did a couple of bullshit articles on women and the effects of climate change on women. And now, okay, if you're in Mauritius or whatever that island is being swallowed up by water, that's one thing. Or if we're talking about, you know, change in industries in Ireland, which means that more care work is required or whatever, like, I mean, links can be made, but they didn't even make those links in those essays. And the reason, so I traced it back, and it's because there was funding made available based on a new policy signed in Geneva or signed in New York at a UN level, saying all countries must implement this climate action plan. Within it, you must take into account feminism and gender and climate change. And so and you must attach funding to it. So Varadkar puts 10 million to it, and he puts out a call, and all the NGOs are sitting there just waiting, because this is what they do all day. They wait for funding calls and they pounce on it. And NWCI goes, climate change and women, we can flip something about that, I suppose, can't we? What do we have to do? We'd have to have a couple of meetings. We can have an event. We might have some champagne, and we'll do a couple of essays, send a report to the government. Like, that's what's going on. Cut their money. Stop giving it to them. You know, this funding that they're giving to people with this nonsense attached to it. That's also the government's. Sorry?
It's an excellent explanation of why, as I was looking at it.
Circular.
Looking at the National Women's Council and thinking, why the hell are they getting involved in that? And then items on local food production. And, you know, this is...
But look,
it's connected to the SDGs. It's not connected to me and you. It's connected to the Sustainable Development Goals. And the Sustainable Development Goals have all these challenges for countries and they have to meet them, and they have to match them, and and you know who was responsible for drafting the Sustainable Development Goals in 2015? Was this Irish lad called Donald Donahue or something, an Irish man and a Kenyan man got together and put together those goals, and then there's sub tasks or sub goals or whatever, and they're all try and because, so sorry to go off on a tangent now, but Ireland doesn't have the kind of influence in the world where we don't have that much influence in the world. But what we can do is what you were saying earlier, Sarah, I think, is be a very good boy and implement it really well. And if you want to be a really, really good boy who's not quite big enough to be actually influential and be on a Security Council, for example, but you can draft the thing that everyone has to follow. So Ireland gets involved in drafting these sustainable development goals, and they feel really good. And then they come home and they say, oh, well, I was a great, like, good boy over in New York and but then they have to enforce it. They can't draft a thing and not enforce it. So then they have all this nonsense in it about women and food production. And they're talking about women in the Sahel. They're talking about women in Mali with droughts and stuff. But, you know, because it's global, they're saying, like, okay, how can we connect Irish women's lives to this thing in the SDGs and make it relevant, and also get 2 salaries out of for a year?
But if you look at it, it's the self-preservation, isn't it? So the NGOs, as you say, are waiting for the funding call. They hop on the bus.
Yeah.
You belong to an organization who get, I don't know, over 1 million anyway, maybe more even. And they conduct these surveys, right? So they're in business, let's call it business, I think about 15 years or something anyway, definitely over 10. And they conduct these surveys every year. And every year, no, it doesn't matter. And there's not just them, there's probably 20 or 30 LGBTQI plus charities. But every year, their surveys come in with even more hate and even more hate.
Yeah.
I've taken a few of these surveys. And actually, they're written in such a way as you cannot come to any other conclusion other than every Irish person wants to murder every other person who's not straight. And literally, you're trying to dodge the way, and they'll ask it a different way, and then a different way, and then a different way. And at the end of the day, then their answer to this is throw loads of money at loads of bunting and paraphernalia, and let's make all these young people look into walking, talking stereotypes. I mean, I collected my daughter, who's 13, from a birthday party at the weekend, and there was one boy there and he had flags all over him. Now, the child is 13. Why he needed to come to the party and tell everyone about his sexual orientation, I don't know. Nobody cares. But they've indoctrinated into these young people now belong to, you are hated. Well, actually, no, we all vote.
Because you know who that serves. That serves belong to's ability to exist, to justify its existence. Because if hatred is gone down, well, then what's the point of belong to? So yeah, I wrote about this last week in another article. It's like they're destroying the mental health of the people they're claiming to serve and to protect by saying to them, things are so bad, we're going to have to keep existing, and because we're going to have to look after you, and tell everyone how bad things are. And I think there's an extra layer going on this particular subject of hatred and discrimination and bullying, because it also serves the government to who has to, from international pressure, introduce this hate speech legislation. So which cohort can they easily get some hate stats from? So now remember so this is why it's so circular. Remember who's paying the bills. The government is essentially paying, they're like commissioning a researching company, consultancy or something. They're essentially paying belong to produce the evidence that belong to is suffering so bad that they must continue for multi-year core and project funding, and also furnish the government with the stats to prove the thing that the government wants to introduce. Like, the whole thing is sick from top to bottom. And it's happening in other countries as well. And you have to say to yourself, why aren't all these race NGOs or traveler NGOs or anti-Semitic NGOs or all of these other, or disability NGOs, why aren't they producing, why don't, like, they get discriminated against like off the charts, like, you know, like a black person like in a wheelchair, imagine the crap in immigrants, you know, like, imagine the drama in their life, like, and then you're just like, no, you're going after these little middle upper class NBs. And it's like, no, so there's 2 things going on. One is that there's a ready-made cohort who are ready to produce these stats, and it's very easy to say, in that community, in the LGBTQI community, I've suffered hatred. Why? Because lots of people don't accept the proposition that sexual dimorphism isn't real. And so we can clock this up as hatred. And, you know, I've seen surveys designed in other countries that will categorize hatred as somebody looking funny at you all the way to being raped. So you might have one rape and 100 people looking funny at you, and then you can say it's gone up 100% in the past year. You know what I mean? And it's all put together. And Maya Forsyther was tweeting last year. Sorry, I know I'm going on now, but Maya Forsyther tweeted last year that invasive questions have been categorized as hateful discrimination in a particular survey by Stonewall in the UK.
You might say to them, where are you from even
Well,
now?
even the other,
but like
the other week there was an
someone
article in the papers, and that was it. Irish people are naturally chatty.
sociable,
And
yeah.
when an awful lot of Irish people, when we meet foreigners, things, we will naturally, personally speaking, I'd be, you know, where are you from, or something along those lines. And I'm not actually being
Racist now.
racist. I'm just curious.
Or making conversation.
But she was saying, you know, she was on the bus and she heard this woman saying, you know, someone, where are you from? And, you know, and have you been here long? And she was sure that this was racism and thing. I thought, no, it's actually quite possibly just a woman of a certain age, Irish woman, making small talk with them because we're naturally curious. And
part of our culture. Yeah, that we're culturally just, yeah.
We chat to people on the bus. We're getting butter at the butter counter. We're chatting and passing.
If you look at that scandal, though, the scandal recently, and they removed the book where they had Family A and Family B, and Family A, Irish family, and it was, you know, don't be like them, be like the other family. There has been this work done again from the top down, NGOs and government, and I don't know why, but to really make you ashamed of any kind of pride in being Irish. And I only saw this again in the last couple of years, whereas Irish people, I don't think ever, you know, it's not like we ever went around hitting anyone over the head with the Irish flag, but they nearly made it so that I know you go to a protest now, and if anyone, you couldn't bring an Irish flag, if you even bring an Irish flag, you know, and then yet, what did I say to you yesterday when we were out walking? There's Simon Harris now, and his campaign posters, he has the Irish flag behind him. And I felt like saying to him, you know, 6 months ago, you would have been vilifying anybody who had the Irish flag up, but he's playing to it. He's now going, well, I need to look nice.
He changed his mind. Like, remember, the thing was with immigration, anyone who said we too high of immigration and was far right, and was hatred and everything else. And then Leo Varadkar said it, and then he said it, and, you know, then, it's affecting the homeless figures. Yeah, because obviously if you bring in all these people, it is going to affect
they're reading the room in the run up to an election.
But do you think, you know,
and again, you have to say who's now advising Simon Harris, and who's back in the Fine Gael hold, and who's saying, okay, this is what you've got to do if you want my support, and that's Phil Hogan.
And what are you talking about there? Phil Hogan has just been brought on as his advisor since he got this top.
Not his advisor, but he's coming in to help with the elections and the candidates. But who did he call when Leo Varadkar came back from New York and resigned? Who did he call? Phil Hogan. Because if you want to get on in Fine Gael, you have to have Phil Hogan's support.
Phil Hogan, because he's brilliant. He's a brilliant politician.
Yeah.
As I say, he is Machiavelli for the modern age.
At reading the room.
He's excellent at reading the room, reading the electorate, doing what needs to be done. Yeah. And he's a party man to the tips of his fingernails. If I was in Simon Harris's place, I would want Phil Hogan on my back.
So I think the danger, though, is that we won't see any overt stuff from now on. So let's imagine Phil Hogan cleans shop. Everyone's on notice, say, like, this stuff is not popular anymore. It's not playing well to the electorate. Don't talk about it. That does not stop, first of all, the core funding and the project funding that's been committed to all those NGOs is still out there. It's still lying in their pockets. They're still in the ears of the politicians. We've never been in their ears because we don't have money and organizing power for it. But those NGOs have never not been in their ears. So what we're worried on a European level is the exact same thing. I think Ursula von der Leyen has recognized that it's a losing battle, it's a losing game, but she still has a strategy for LGBTQ, and it still contains things in it. There'll be no fanfare. They won't be invited to the office to have a Progress Pride flag draped over the coffee table in the Oireachtas or whatever in government buildings. Do you know what I mean? But there will be stuff there, so we need to be really careful that we pay close attention to it, because what is this big, important piece of legislation coming up now? what was it? Jill Nesbitt's been talking about it, but did it go off like, is it the a revision of the Equal Treatment Directive or something? There's some big piece of legislation. Which one?
The Status Act, I think, is the revision of the Equal Status Act.
Yes, this is a danger.
Because
And
the
you're
Equal Status Act at the minute, it's been changed over the years, but it at the minute would have the old interpretation of gender in there to mean sex, because gender in law in Ireland always meant sex. And you know, now it's used to mean gender of the, you know, endless number of made up invented
The
terms.
gender of the person of the gender that they think that gender that they
Sharon
possibly might be
Keoghan,
gendered.
she read out 70 of them. So I think now the work they're doing is to try and put gender identity into the Equal Status Act.
so
again, and the blurring of the lines, it's the removal of sex-based rights, really. For
Yeah.
you know, you don't, if a man can say he's a woman, which he can now with the Gender Recognition Act, then you literally have no rights. It needs case law for someone to push back and go, well, I feel like this man in the changing room or this man.
and there'll be no referendum over that, and there'll be no marches in the street. That will be done quietly, and it'll be pushed by people that we'll never have heard of. And so it'll be our job to never stop reminding people that that's what they're doing with this. That's what this is. When we add that little word identity alongside gender, that is what's happening, is we're erasing sex-based rights. Like, and that's really hard to do. I think in a lot of countries, this pullback is going to happen, but it's not necessarily going to be that things get dropped. I think that they'll just be much more silent about it.
And go in underneath, and just quietly pass and put in, and words just filling documents. Maybe we should talk about that maybe in the next week or next couple of weeks. Is that that act? What is that act again? What you were talking about, Jill Nesbitt?
Equal Status Act. I think they're thinking of changing. Yeah, I need to go and dig it up.
We need to get the word out there, and we need to keep these conversations going on a weekly basis. I know that everybody can't get in every week, but we'll keep this going and get more people talking, and see who we can get on. You know, we have a list of panelists in our group. And bring on guests and start talking, guest panelists as well. Get everybody talking, and you know, start getting people in Europe talking about it. Start getting people in America talking about what is happening here in Ireland, and putting pressure on our public representatives, and to put pressure on the NGOs, and defund an awful lot of the NGOs who are not representing and who they are saying they are on the tin. And we need that. We need to bring back accountability back into Irish politics and Irish society. And we need to reclaim our status, and reclaim women and women's rights and children. And when we do that, we're protecting children's rights. We've gone nearly 2 hours, ladies. It's our first introductory session, so we're fine. We'll go to 2 hours. But you know, briefly, just before we go, I'm curious, and I'm sure a lot of the viewers and the future viewers, and maybe people who have an interest in this abroad and wants to come on and talk about things, is how did we all get involved in this? So maybe if we do maybe 2 minutes each. How did you get involved in this fight, in this war? Because it is a fight and it's a war, and we're fighting battles all the time. So, Julie, if I could come to you first, how did you get involved, and when?
Well, I've always sort of been interested. I remember at the time I used to watch the Lydia Foy thing when he was, you know, trying to get his birth certificate changed and everything else, and going to Europe and everything else. And I thought, they'll never, you know, he's just a mad man. Like, he's the father of children. How could he ever be claimed to be a woman? How could anyone ever believe he's a woman and everything else? And of course, then eventually, when he took it to the Supreme Court and won the case, I still couldn't really believe it, because I thought to myself, how can you change it? You know, he got a birth certificate then to say he was born a woman. I thought, how can you change what to me would be in a historic document like a birth cert? So that was sort of thing. And I thought, well, just a mad sort of thing. But then it's probably only in the past 3 or 4 years that really, when I saw the sort of present movement into the way that things were going, and basically sort of the erasure of women and things like that, and getting rid of the words for woman and things. I think, you know, we fought so hard. I do remember in Ireland in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, everything like contraception and the whole shoot, we fought too hard to give it all up. That's basically. So
And
it's just
you were involved in the silent protests as well, with the is it the Irish Women's Lobby group?
Oh yeah, well, with various groups. I mean, I'd sort of turn up at various different sort of protests and groups, and basically just to put feet on the ground or whatever. And of course, my main thing as well would be writing and emailing and pestering politicians and things like that. So just that's basically been it.
That is great, because you're a great inspiration to all of us, Julie. And I would imagine especially to your daughter, Sarah. So Sarah, how did you get involved with this, apart from your mother?
Well, I think it was about 4 years ago, my sister-in-law told me that the word woman had been removed from cervical screening, and that was my introduction to it. Just couldn't believe it. I didn't know anything about what had been going on behind the scenes, hadn't been paying attention at all. And when I heard that, and then I started to dig and scratch around, this is absolutely insane what's been happening. And then when I heard about the GRA, after that, I thought, you know, I couldn't believe that this had happened, that I hadn't heard about it. And then the final straw for me was the Women's Council. I thought, right, well, we just need to, this will be easy. We just need to alert the Women's Council, because they work on our behalf. Yeah, and I think it was just devastating that they, you know, I remember getting onto their website, a woman is anyone who says they're a woman. And just, what the hell has happened? Where was I? How did I miss this? And then they signed that letter at the end of 2020, the letter that was done, that Amnesty also signed, which said that these believers in biology, which at that time obviously I had discovered I was one of, and it's not a believer because it's not a belief, it's just reality, should have their right to political and media representation removed. And they were calling on politicians in the media to basically silence women. I mean, I am still 4.5 years later, absolutely incredulous. I am so angry at the Women's Council. And so I started emailing them, and then decided to turn up to an event because they wouldn't answer my email. And they started to come to events because they had seen my email. They decided I wasn't a safe person to have around. So yeah, then I took a case last year against them. I lost. The adjudicator in the WRC decided that they were perfectly entitled to ban me from their event because I posed a threat to them. Basically, having this opinion means that if you went in there, you could be potentially someone who would be violent and cause a scene. And so, you know, they don't trust us to answer our emails. They won't speak on the phone. You can't go to their events. There's no acceptable way to engage with the National Women's Council. So now mostly I rant about them. And I just feel it's absolutely heartbreaking for Irish women that there isn't anybody who's willing to say, you know, on our behalf, that we have the right to single-sex spaces, that our daughters should be able to play sport and not have boys turn up, that the women down in Limerick prison shouldn't have to share with men like Barbie Kardashian. And just the vilification of anyone who's willing to stand up for women's rights, as that we somehow have you know, some other agenda, or that it's hate-filled, as opposed to, no, we're outraged actually that we're being put in this position, and we should be outraged, and we're entitled to be outraged. So that's kind of where I am now, 4 years in, even more horrified and outraged than ever. And I kind of wish I'd never found out, because it's impossible to look away once you see it.
And thank you, Julie and Sarah. And Roshi Mishu, how did you get involved? And you're a Dublin woman based in Belgium. So how did you get involved and why?
I think I've been thinking about this a lot lately. I think I kind of got generally red pilled before I got trans pilled, generally, because I got a job working in science communication, and I worked for a project funder. So we would give money to scientists and they would do work with it. And then my job was to do the bit afterwards. We say, look, we gave them all this money and they did this great job and this was a great project and blah, blah, blah. So I had a bit of a propagandist on behalf of the funder, which was fine. But I remember there was hard science stuff and there'd be a little bit of messing around with results and trying to make things seem better than they were, and just standard stuff that goes on and that. But then there was the stuff coming out of sociology and feminist studies and queer studies and anthropology and stuff, and some of it seemed quite wacky. And I started for the first time to think, like, hold on a minute, is this knowledge being produced here, or is it activism or whatever? And then I came across James Lindsay and Helen Pluckrose, and they had this hoax where they wrote these batshit nutty fake papers on stupid subjects, as long as they had a very ideological activist type angle, like fat phobia or transphobia, or had some sort of woke or critical justice slant, no matter how ridiculous it was. And they got a load of papers accepted before they got caught. And it crashed all of my trust in like knowledge producing institutions, which just like went down the toilet immediately. But during that time, those three academics who had written those papers were starting to get attacked by not by fat studies people or black studies people or indigenous studies people, but by trans activists, particularly viciously, who were going bananas. And I was like, well, that's the easiest one to see is clearly bullshit, because they're saying male can be female. And so I just sort of scratched at that itch a little bit, and I found that these people were absolutely bananas. And it was just so incredible to watch. And so the more I learned about it, the more I was like, hold on, you're saying to me some people actually believe this stuff. And then at some point I just was like, I'm going to go to England to a Kelly J. Keane event, because I want to see the trans rights activists up close and in person. I want to see, do these people exist? Are they real? Do they really believe this? And lo and behold, they are definitely real. So yeah, that's how I got into it. And then just a last thing to add, I thought to myself, I started to research a lot. It's a little bit like what you're doing, Roisin. I started to think about a lot about in the future having a record of everything that happened, because I was studying a lot of what happened in the trans rights activist movement, and I saw that they were really good at documenting their history. And the reason they're so good at documenting their history is because somebody gave them a big fat grant to do so. So they've got like trans libraries and digital archives and so you can read the entire history of it. And I was going to these little meetings here and there in England and in Germany and I was like, nobody's documenting this. So I was like, I would like to just make sure there's a record. That's why I show up to all the events. It's not just to be an extra body, like you were saying, Julie. It's also because I want to have a record of all this stuff, and I take pictures, I pick up all the stickers, the badges. One day there's going to be collections, because we resisted this bullshit. And one day everyone's going to say, where were all the feminists? It's like, well, we're right here and we were all there and here's all the evidence, So that's how I sort of got into it.
A bit like the suffragettes, isn't it? Back 100 years ago, the suffragettes. Who were the suffragettes? Who were standing up for women's rights? And that record is there, and we need to keep this record. And who were the people in the trenches? Who were there, and who said what, and who did what? And it's who. And that's really important. It's really important to document who stood up, who showed up, and who spoke up. And I think that's really important. Even
because we're right. And I don't think, I don't know if any other movement in history has been as convinced as I am that we're on the right side here and that we're doing the right thing. So I have no qualms about it. I sleep super well at night. I'm not worried. Like, it's frustrating, it's annoying, but we're doing the right thing. So it's actually a no-brainer almost.
Yeah. I'm Tracy Donegan, as a midwife, a doula, and a Dublin woman living in Texas, in the Yellow Rose of Texas and the red state of Texas, a Democrat, now voting Republican, a MAGA woman, and a Trump supporter. How did you get into all this?
Well, I have to say, I did the whole pronoun thing. I drank a little bit of the Kool-Aid. It's like I think it was during COVID when I was doing doula training, and I thought, oh, okay, this is new, but I want to be inclusive. Don't want anyone to feel, but I didn't realize that when you start this pronoun thing, it ends up with what happened in Edinburgh, where you've got a rape crisis center run by a man who's telling women to reframe their trauma and won't have single sex spaces for women who have been raped. So for me, that part of it, and looking at what was then women being men, like predators being put in women's prisons, like the most vulnerable women on the planet, who are in prison for, usually they've grown up with abuse, or it's drug related, or didn't pay your TV license, are put in a cell with a predator. It's just like, how much do they hate women that was ever considered to be anyway justifiable? It's ludicrous. But we're on the other side of it here. We're coming on the other side of it in the US, and it feels really good.
Well, that's hope. We're relying on that, the wind blowing over here to Ireland and bringing that sunshine and bringing that wonderful feeling, and actually bringing back normality and clarity back into society, politically, education, and protecting our children. Especially for me, it's about protecting the younger generation, protecting the children, protecting the babies. For me, it was I was on local radio. I had a women's program called the Woman to Woman Show, and that came out of my dissertation from my media and PR, because I used to love formats. I didn't realize when I went back to study as a mature adult, media and public relations, I was just in the media studies, the formats, I loved them. It was like obsessed. Okay, formats. So anyway, I developed a format for local radio and Woman to Woman Show. And at that time, funny enough, it was Aidan O'Riordan from the Labour Party said there's no all-female radio panel shows, right? And originally I was only supposed to be the producer because I had a little voice, and I was very shy, and I had a speech impediment. So I didn't think I had the radio voice. So I on the Woman to Woman show, I was interviewing, all these women and all these empowered women and all these NGOs and all these, professional women and women supporting women, big word salad, and I started, but women don't support women, they don't, it's all this word salad. And the Me Too movement came from, and I went, but this is fake. This Me Too movement, I could see it, came from Hollywood. And I used to say on radio, I don't believe in the Me Too movement because it all came from Hollywood to cover up all the sex shit that was going on, and all that. And so I started looking into it more. And then I remember specifically, I was on the radio and I was interviewing someone from the Women's Council, National Women's Council of Ireland. And I remember it was a phone call. I had my earphones in and I was listening. I had the mic here and I was looking into the chair in the corner and going, what the Jesus am I doing here? What am I promoting? And it was the National Women's Council of Ireland. And then I started saying, but all the guests, all these women's guests, majority of them, were all pushing these agendas, all these NGO agendas, the Be Kind group, Be Kind, and all this, and inclusive. And I went, but that's bullshit. And do you really mean what you're saying? And then I would notice that even the National Women's Council of Ireland, I would say to Paul, who's this and who's that? Because I have a memory of a goldfish. Paul was saying, oh, she was former Labour Party, she was former Sinn Féin. Then I noticed that all the National Women's Council and NGOs and women's groups were former employees of political groups. And I'm like, okay, something's not right there. It's all like a job for the boys and a job for the women. And they were all pushing these agendas. And so then anyway, I left the local media, and I was really left a year before 2021. I took time off because I just couldn't take it anymore. Then I went back, and the radio manager phoned me one day, when are you coming back? And I went, maybe another month. And then I went on Twitter. I thought I was going crazy. I thought I was absolutely losing my mind. Was I the only woman that could see what was going on? And I was down in Lidl's one lunchtime, and I had my battery. You remember one of them times your battery's low and you're at the checkout? So I came back and plugged it in, and I said, hello, I have a missed call from here. And lo and behold, who was it? Our lovely Sarah, who's here tonight. And she said, Roisin, Roisin, I see you tweeting away on Twitter to the abyss. And I used to put, is no any women out there, is any other women think the same as me? And Sarah called me. Sarah actually called me. And I sat here in this chair right here, and I was sitting with my feet above this chair, and we spoke for an hour. And after that, I cried with relief. And Sarah said, Roisin, there's other women out there, there's other groups. But I noticed they were all from Dublin. There was none here locally in Kilkenny. And if they were whispering it. And then Sarah then said, oh, I'll add you to the mailing list of the women, Wicklow Women for Women and all the other women out there. And to me, that was a lifeline. So Sarah, thank you so much. That was a lifeline. And I suppose then at the Let Women Speak, you know, where most of us all met and do all that. And then it was like, okay, so what do I do? And then I stopped doing videos for my Confident Women Ireland. So I noticed I was pushing the same agendas. And I went, okay, there's something wrong there. So I went and focused more until I could find out what about Confident Women Ireland, about the Irish Political Roundup, and how I could merge it and how I could get the right women with the right message, with the right fact checks to actually voice this. And so then I spent the last 2 years looking for them women, and you're all here, and other women are in the other groups as well. Women who are the genuine reason, and women who will support women. We're not going to agree all the time. We're going to have different perspectives or different avenues and different ways of looking things or doing things, but at least we can support one another and be there for one another and watch one another's back. And I think to me, that's what's really important. And looking after the young. And what I noticed was, and I think that's what my drive is using my skills, using the platforms, building up and promoting women who are the voice for other women and other children, and using the platforms that I can do in getting this message out and who's who in Ireland doing this. And that's really important to me, because it's women of our age that are going to save other younger girls and younger babies and stop the child abuse of the surrogacy of transgender men who think they can breastfeed or have a womb transplant and all those things and breastfeed and so no, yeah, it was a long road and it was very lonely. I have to say, when you're not in Dublin and you're in a rural, even though it's a progressive city, it was like to be kind. And I'm just too straight talking, and the menopause and everything else. I've got no more F's to give, and I've no time for bullshit. You know, so
Well said.
and so thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Julie, and thank you, Roisin, and thank you, Tracy, because you've been a lifeline, like many other women who we've met and we all know, a lifeline. And maybe that through some strange way that we can use these channels to be a lifeline for younger women, younger men, and the younger generation and children, and protect the young children and babies.
Thank you, Roisin. Well said. Lovely to connect with you too.
And ladies, we've had our introductory, so it's probably going on. We won't go on for 2 hours and something the next time, but it's a nice introduction, and with our why and our purpose, and giving out a general synopsis to what's happening here in Ireland. And you know, I look forward to our weekly or regular chats Some weeks
Mhm.
you'll be able to make it, and some weeks you won't, and that's good too. You can pop in and out. And if you know anybody who wants to, you think is a very good voice or someone to come on as a guest, let's get them on. Any information. And I think let's put the link to Julie's very viral video of asking the politician what is a woman in the description links below.
Yeah, I want to see that. I haven't seen it yet.
Roshan, let's put your links in below, in the description box below. If you send me the links to even the one you put up today about the man breastfeeding with a breast. And Tracy, we'll put your links into below to your website and to your what you do as a doula and your Instagram and social media. And we'll do that and put the links down below so people can contact you and reach out to you.